So last week, you might remember that we started off our series with Let's Go Fishing, One Size Does Not Fit All. And it was based on this, but the whole series that I do, this workshop I do, is based on this one Bible text right here. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And so we started talking about the fact that one size does not fit all. And I started sharing with you some of the things I've learned from fishing that I believe apply to witnessing to the world around us. And last week I shared with you 2 fishing tips, and they were, tip number 1, use more than one approach. In other words, when we go into the world, there are 2 groups of people we're going to encounter, believers and unbelievers. And how I go about witnessing to a believer of another faith or another denomination is very different than how I witness to an unbeliever. And then we talked about how it is you need to use the right lure. And we talked about the fact that when it comes to evangelism, we need to understand that evangelism is not about us or for us. Evangelism is for those who are lost, because you are spiritually alive. And how I go about reaching you who are spiritually alive should be very different, and is very different, than how I go about reaching those who are spiritually dead. And so when we make evangelism about us, it's no longer evangelism. Do you follow me? I want to drive this home. Evangelism isn't for us, it is for those who are spiritually lost. So our methods and how we go about reaching the lost is very different than how I go about reaching you. Now today, I want to talk about witnessing and how witnessing has changed since the birth of our church. Right? Our church was born in the 1800s, and the world has changed. North America has changed, and the people we are trying to reach has changed since the time of our pioneers. The question is, have we changed our methods to meet and reach the current world? And so I have my 3rd fishing tip for you today. And my 3rd fishing tip is this: know and understand where you are fishing. Let me give you an example of this. My good friend Yuri Gabarici will call me up and say, "Hey Bob, let's go fishing, and we're going to go fishing at this particular lake." The first one it's called Lac La Pêche. I'd never been there. So one of the first things I do before I go to a new body of water is I want to understand what's in that water. I want to know if there's trout in that lake. I want to know if there's bass or walleye in that lake. I want to know if there's pike in that lake. Now, do you know why I might want to know what kind of fish are in the lake? Because the lures I will use will depend on the fish who live there. So, for example, if there are trout in that lake, I am going to use lures that are like this. I've got we call this a blue fox, even though it's pink. And I have here a red and yellow Panther Martin. This is my go-to for trout. And what I've discovered is that there are times when certain trout will ignore a certain lure. Some lures that they will be attracted to, and in a different body of water, the trout there may reject that same lure. So I study the body of water, and I ask other fishermen, what are they biting on? Why am I asking the question, what are they biting on? Because I want to catch fish, right? So I want to know what they're biting on. Now, if I'm dealing with bass, I'm going to use, my tackle box is getting tangly. It ain't a tackle box if you don't have to deal with a little bit of a mess. Oh my goodness, here we go. Let it go, come on. Let it go. You can tell they hook really well. There we go. I might use, for bass, a rat, because it swims really well, and it rattles. And I tell you, when bass hear that rattling, they go crazy. And this splashes on top of the water. It's called a whopper plopper. Oh, this is my go-to. And again, if I throw this on the top of the water and there are trout around, they're going to ignore this. They can't even eat this. But if I throw this in the water and the bass hear this splashing across the water, boom, I'm going to get bass. So again, I will ask people, what are they biting on? Rats? Whopper ploppers? Is it plastics? Is it worms? I want to know what they're biting on because it changes from lake to lake. Then I get to pike, and I might haul out a duck. First time I saw this, I thought, man, you guys are sick. But the pike will go after this, or they will go after this, or I even have lures that are as long as this. Now here's what you need to know. I would never throw this at a trout. Do you know why? Because the moment this splashes on the water, it scares all the trout away. As a matter of fact, when a trout sees this, it thinks it's going to eat it. I would never toss this out to a trout in the same way I would never toss this out to a pike. Pike wouldn't even see this. I mean, this isn't even an appetizer to a pike. My point being, what works in one body of water may not work in another, and you need to understand the species you're trying to catch because your lure, what you're trying to attract them with, changes from place to place. Am I making sense? Okay, now some of you, you're not fishermen, this might be boring you, so let me make this practical. When it comes to witnessing, one of the things we had to learn as a church, and this was a hard lesson, and that is what works in one place evangelistically does not work in another. And we learned this the hard way with our missionaries because we sent missionaries overseas and we used the same techniques in Africa that we would use in North America and then couldn't figure out why we were failing. We went to South America and used the same techniques we were using in North America and couldn't figure out why we were failing. And the reason we were failing is because the people in South America do not think like the people in North America. And what we value and embrace, they don't necessarily value and embrace in other countries. And so we had to learn culturally how to navigate other cultures. Let me give you an example. I'm 18 years of age and I am down in Honduras. We are there to build a church. And I was asked to speak at a church that had never seen a foreigner before. No foreigner had ever actually spoken in this church in that part of Honduras. And I was deeply honored to be invited to go and speak at that church. I'm 18, a foreigner has never been there before, and now I realized I got to represent. Do you hear what I'm saying? Right? I need to make an impression as a foreigner. So Sabbath morning, they put me in a speedboat. We're going up the coast towards this church because there's no road, no airport. Only way in and out is through a boat. I'm used to this. I'm from Newfoundland. I'm like, this is home. And on the way up to that church, I confessed to my host that I was a little nervous because I need to represent. And my host said to me, don't you ever say that again. He says, don't you ever show any weakness, he said, because here in Honduras, our men are strong and they are confident, and if you as a pastor show any weakness, they will not respect you, and if they don't respect you, they will not listen to you. Now, back here in Canada, we value transparency and a little vulnerability. So when I share with you that I struggle with some of the things I preach, I have people come up to me and go, Pastor, thank you for sharing your humanity with us and your walk, because I struggle with that too. And people have told me it makes me relatable, and that it makes me real, and there's something humble, right? I don't give out too much information, but a couple of weeks ago when I shared with you, I really struggled in 2024. People were like, Pastor, thank you for sharing your journey with us. Vulnerability is valued in Canada, but it wasn't in Honduras at that time. Years later, I go to Belize. We're going to build a church. And so we go into the community. Now, hear me out. Before we went to that community in Belize to build another church, we were going to build a church following year evangelistic series. I received 4 weeks of training as to how to reach and communicate with and interact with the people of Belize. We were going to southern Belize. The people in the southern Belize are the ancestors of the Mayans. They value hard work, confidence, and strength, but they also value humility, kindness, and compassion. So when they discovered that the Jehovah's Witnesses who were trying to evangelize there had a habit of excommunicating people who fell out of favor with the church, they barred their doors to the Jehovah's Witnesses. In that culture, you do not excommunicate somebody so hard they can never come back to the tribe. So here we are. We go down to Belize, and we hire people to help us build the church. And we get some carpenters, some locals. And we asked the locals to tell us how to build their church. And they said to us, "What do you mean you want us to tell you how to build the church?" We said, "Well, it's your country, your land, your climate. It's going to be your church. We don't know how to build a church here. You tell us how to build a church here." You know what they said? "We've never had foreigners ask us how to do anything. They always assume they know how to do it best, and then it fails and falls apart." So word got out in this community that the Seventh-day Adventists were humble enough to ask the locals how to build a church. We went from door to door to door. We ate with them, we laughed with them, we visited with them. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were watching us and going, "They won't let us through the door. We were told this was ripe for harvest, and yet these people won't talk to us, but they're talking to you." So we came back the next year after we built the church. And the church was full. Full. So full, we actually had to take a big bed sheet, hang it up on the wall outside the church, put a projector outside the church, project on the wall of the church, while there was some 250, 300 people outside the church listening to the sermon taking place inside. Because there, they valued humility, kindness, and compassion. So do you follow me when I say you need to understand the waters in which you're fishing? Because what may work in one place may be a cultural and moral violation in another. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I find this principle in the Word of God. It comes from Paul, and Paul understood the waters in which he was fishing. And he says in 1 Corinthians 9:20-22, "When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ." Now look at what he says in verse 21. "When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law," pause right here. He's not talking about the 10 Commandments. He's talking about Jewish laws and traditions. He says, "When I'm with the Gentiles who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law so I can do what? Bring them to Christ." He says, "When I am with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ." Now, do you understand what Paul is saying? How I reach the weak is different than the Jew. How I reach the Jew is different than the Gentile. How I reach Greeks is different than how I reach Romans. What nationality was Paul? He was a Jew. But when he was with the Greeks, he became a Greek. In order to do what? To reach the Greeks. Now, I'm going to say something that sometimes gets me into trouble that some people do not like, but I'm going to say it anyway. Paul understood he was not sent by God to preserve his culture, but to promote the kingdom. Do you hear me? So when I go to Brazil, if I ever get to go, somebody take me. But, amen? Okay, hands up, I'm going to, right? But if I ever get to go to Brazil, I need to understand Brazilians in order to do what? bring them to Christ. And I need to understand I'm not there to be a Canadian, I'm there to be an ambassador of the kingdom. Okay, now this is where it's going to get real. Because where are you living right now? In Canada. Do you hear me? Right now, you are living in Canada. Where has God planted you? In Canada. So, is it possible that God sent you here to learn how to be a Canadian so that you might reach who? For who? For Christ. Now, here's what gets me. And I hope that the people who I answer to are listening right now. What gets me is we have all these people who come to Canada, and not once do we ever train you, our people, our friends from other nations and countries, even our own Canadians. We don't even teach Canadians how to be a Canadian to reach Canadians for Jesus Christ. You are in a mission field, and yet we have not trained you to be a missionary. I promise you, if I said I want to go be a missionary in Saudi Arabia, I will immediately be put through 6 months of training so that I understand the culture. But how many of us were ever trained to understand the culture in which you live in order to reach them for Christ? My job as your pastor is to teach you how to be a Canadian in order that you might reach Canadians. Because you're not here to preserve a culture, you're here to promote a kingdom. Are you here to promote a kingdom, or are you looking to preserve a culture? You got to get real about this. So I asked this question, what if the reason we're not reaching the general Canadian population is because we're using methods and strategies that do not work for the waters we are fishing in? And today, and in my next messages, couple of messages, I want you to understand the waters you're fishing in. And you might think, well, Pastor Bob, this doesn't apply to me. I'm going to tell you why it does. Because if you're a parent and you have young children, your children are going to grow up to be Canadian. Do you hear me? Your children will grow up to be Canadian. Some of you already have children who are looking at you and saying, we're not back home. Some of you have family members who are like, don't talk to me that way, we're not back home. I almost fell off here. You hear me? You've got, your kids are gonna grow up and be Canadian, and that culture, you cannot escape the culture and its influence. And so if we're gonna reach our kids and keep our kids, we need to understand our mission field. Our children will be Canadian. The last time I said this, I had 10 youth stand up in the church and look at the parents and say, I've been trying to tell you this. That was a Caribbean church. They can get away with that there. Young people, young adults are responding more to these messages than any other group because they're trying to say, the world I'm living in is not the world that got you here. And we have a saying, what got us here will not get them there. So I want you to listen to me, because this is going to affect your babies and your grandbabies. So I want to turn you into missionaries who know how to witness to your children, your grandchildren, and the Canadians who are around you. And it begins with understanding that the Seventh-day Adventist Church was born in North America. Do you follow me? Is this true? Is this historically accurate? Right? Our church was born in North America, but not just North America, but it was born in what we prophetically call Protestant United States. Right? John the Revelator, he has a vision. And in this vision, there's this beast with lamb-like horns coming up out of the earth. Every other beast that came up out of the sea, signifying they came from places that were densely populated. They had horns, signifying they were powerful nations and kingdoms, and those horns had crowns, indicating they were ruled by popes, kings, and queens. But not this beast. This beast came up with lamb-like horns. It would have a different form of governance. It had no crowns. It would be a republic that would be based on the principles of religious freedom. Our church was born into a country of religious freedom. That meant that we could grow and explore and exercise our religion without the fear of persecution. We could share the three angels' message without fear of repercussions. Was God wise in choosing the time in which he raised up our church? Right? He gave birth to an end-time people at a time of peace. And what you want to know is that back in the 1800s, most people would have identified not only as being a Christian, but they would have identified themselves as belonging to one of the major Protestant denominations: Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, Salvation Army, Quakers, and so on and so forth. Our pioneers came out of those Protestant churches, and they brought the principles and the beliefs of Protestantism with them. 90% of what we believe, everybody else believed. This was a Christian nation. This meant we didn't have to preach the gospel because they already had it. We didn't have to preach baptism and how to be baptized because they're Protestants and they already had it. They had a saving relationship with Jesus. They were baptized and they were Bible-believing people. And in 1844, our pioneers, who were not yet Adventists, were good Christian people like all the other Protestants around them. We were Protestants. We still are. And so when God formed our church, and anybody know when our church was formed? Anybody know what year that was? It was May of 1863. And we formed as a church, not because we worshiped any differently than anybody else, because we didn't. We were Protestants. Our worship service looked like every other Protestant church because that's where we learned worship from. We dressed like everybody else. Our songs, our hymnals, our music was very similar to every other church. We had the gospel. We had baptism. So how, as a church, were we supposed to reach a world which was very similar to us in belief? What would help us to stand out? And what stood out was not how we worshiped or dressed. Again, that was like everybody else. What stood out was 5 unique beliefs. Salvation, how we were saved, is not once saved, always saved. Second coming of Jesus, every eye shall see him. State of the dead, when you die, you're dead until Jesus comes again. Hell, no, there's no everlasting hell, but Jesus will judge the world and then annihilation comes. And then we had Jesus in the sanctuary, and we had the investigative judgment in which Jesus is sealing and securing the salvation of his people. 5 distinct doctrines that make us unique as compared to all the other churches. It's our beliefs that make us distinct. That, and well, at one point it was vegetarianism too, but the world's caught on to that. But do you hear? Our mission field was very similar to us in nature. So how did we win the world? And here's what happened. We won the world and we won souls by winning arguments and debates. See, I didn't have to convince you to accept Jesus. You already had Jesus. I didn't have to convince you of baptism. You already had that. What I had to do was to convince you to move out of your church into our church because we had more truth. We had a greater light. The 3 angels' message and the hope of Christ's soon return. And so our claim was this: we have the truth. And we do and we did. We had more light on these 5 distinct doctrines than any other church. And because of our light, we were the only church that could adequately prepare, and still is the only church that can adequately prepare the world for the second coming of Jesus. That's our mission, in part. That's why we're raised up. And our claim was, we have the truth. And so all we had to do was listen to people's arguments and their objections to those 5 truths, and then we put together Bible studies that would help us from the Bible to argue for or against people's arguments. All we had to do was argue, and we became really good at arguing. We're still good at arguing. Go to Sabbath school sometime. We're really good at arguing. We became a church that won souls by having the better argument. By and large, because we didn't have to sell you on the gospel. You already had it. And then the world changed. Because you see, back in the 1800s, the church and the world were pretty much culturally in alignment. Because you see, because Christians built America, Christian values got poured into the culture. So the church influenced and helped to shape American culture. So the morals and the values and the ethics of the church were poured into the culture around them. Everybody had gone to church, everybody had read a Bible. At some point, everybody could say, "This is my church." It was a religious nation shaped by religion. And that was the world into which our church was born. And then that church and the world would have a serious departure. And the world would change. And when it did, it created a divide between the church and the culture it's so wide, it would make the Grand Canyon look like a pothole. And I want to share with you what changed so you understand the world into which your children are being born. This is your mission field. It all began to change back in the 1950s. And back in the 1950s, our music, the first shift was with music. Our music was acoustic and it was mellow in nature. It was fun, it was soft, it was romantic. And we had big bands like the Glenn Miller, and some of you might be old enough to remember what I'm talking about. I grew up with this, by the way. There was champagne and waltzing music of Lawrence Welk, and you had the crooners like Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett, and we had swing, we had jazz, and we had bebop. But it was fun, and it was romantic, and it was family-oriented. And then the music, and it also reflected the music of the church. If you went to church, the music in the church wasn't very different than what you would find in your culture, because the church shaped music. Then in the 1960s, that radically changed, and this is where the departure began. Our music lost its innocence. It became louder and very energetic. It became electric and acoustic combined. It became associated with civil unrest, and it became an outcry against injustice and inequality. And the church didn't know what to do with this, because this was the first time music was used as an art form to complain about what was wrong with the world. Politicians didn't like it. They didn't like it when they got called out on the Vietnam War through our music. And the politicians didn't like it. The bankers didn't like it. And unfortunately, the church didn't understand it. All the church saw was complaining and protests and young people complaining about a world that at the time everybody thought was great because we had money, we had wealth, people were working. What are you complaining about? And the church did not know how to respond to a generation that says everything's not right. And that generation would go on to create what we now call the drug culture and the hippie movement. I don't know if you had a hippie movement where you come from, but we had a hippie movement. And the attitude was, if it feels good, do it. And they rebelled against institutions, and then they started turning to Eastern gurus, and Eastern mysticism defined enlightenment because the church was not addressing real societal issues and the concerns of a generation. Here's what happened. We lost an entire generation, and we didn't know how to respond to it. For the first time in the history of the United States of America and Canada and the Western world, our youth left the church and we didn't know how to respond. Our church was crying out, our young people were crying out in pain, and instead of coming alongside them and working with them, we condemned the culture, and when we did, we drove them out of the church. And so we went into this free love. If it feels good, let's do it. And we didn't know what to do with a generation that left the church. All we knew how to do was condemn it. Our arguments could not answer their concerns. They were asking questions we didn't have answers to. And as a church, we were paralyzed. And instead of reaching out to the culture, we retreated from it. So then, along comes postmodernism. And this would forever change North America. And it happened in the 1980s. And this was a major shift in how we understood and interpreted the world around us. Now, the world has gone through three major world shifts. Worldviews. The worldview is how you understand and interpret the world around you. The first worldview, historically speaking, and there's been three major shifts regarding how human beings understood and interpreted the world. The first was through superstition. This is the age in which we tried to explain how the world worked through superstitious religious beliefs and practices. If a volcano blew up, who caused it? The gods. If there was a flood, who caused it? The gods. If there was a good harvest, who caused it? How we explained the world, the disasters and the floods and all the good stuff, was through a religious lens of you have to make the gods happy, otherwise bad things happen. And everything was explained through superstitious religious beliefs. So if you wanted to make the gods happy, sacrifice a kid or two. If the gods had blessed you, give them your firstborn. If the gods weren't blessing you, give them your first and secondborn. Because the goal of, and the worldview was, you have to appease angry gods. And this is, by the way, how the doctrine of hell was created. The doctrine of hell was created to scare people into behaving the way the church wanted them to. Because if you tick God off, he would burn you forever. But then that changed. It changed around the 1500s when we entered into modernism. And this is the age of enlightenment, where the prevailing belief was that reason and science would make the world a better place. The idea being that both science and religion working together. Do you catch this? We believe that science and religion working together could create an understanding of how all truth works. Thus, the world would become a better place. So guys like Sir Isaac Newton said, look, I see scientific laws that govern how things work. So if there are scientific laws, there has to be a lawmaker. So if we understand science, we can understand the mind of God. And when we understand the mind of God, we can make the world a better place for everybody. So enlightenment and the pursuit of truth was supposed to end war, end poverty, end hatred and bigotry. Enlightenment was supposed to make the world a better place for everybody. And so the goal was the pursuit and discovery of truth. Guess which age our church was born in? Superstitious or modern? Modern. What was our claim? We have the truth. And that worked in an age where everybody was looking for truth. So we said to people, if you're looking for truth, come to our church because we have it. But now let me ask you, did modernism deliver on its promise to make the world a better place for everybody? And this is what the youth of America and Canada are so upset about. This is what makes them angry. This is what scares them, is because science and religion and our institutions did not make the world a better place. Science brought us better ways to kill each other. Economic institutions were oppressive, corrupt, and greedy. Religious institutions became plagued by scandals of abuse, power, and greed. Educational institutions began to focus on creating workers for the industrial machine. And so our youth in the 80s abandoned modernism and the concepts of truth. And now we became postmodern. This is your mission field. I need you to hear me. This is your mission field now. Postmodernism is a flat-out rejection of the notion of absolute truth. Church, what do we have? What are they rejecting? So if you go to this generation and you claim to have the truth, they will tune you out. If you claim to be the church, they will tune you out. There was a time when that worked for us, but that time has come and gone. So for them, again, this is your mission field. This is the world your kids are growing up in. Truth is a human construct. There is no truth, only experience. Have you heard these things? You've heard these things, right? Therefore, truth is relative and subjective. There is your truth, and then there is my truth, and my personal experiences and feelings do what? Trump truth. Have you been experiencing this? Have you heard this? This is the world in which you live. This is the worldview of your mission field. You may not accept this, but they do, which is why I say when I try to reach you, I use the truth, but with them, I have to come at them sideways. Why? Because for them, religion, science, and politics can no longer be trusted as a reliable source for the truth. That's tough when your claim is we have the truth. Do you follow me? Again, this is your mission field. North America today, you live in an age where most people believe that religion is what's wrong with this world. Think about that. You tell somebody you're a Christian, and their automatic assumption is you're what's wrong with this world. So they believe that if you can rid the world of religion, and you will remove 90% of the world's problems. Let's just get rid of your church, and we can get rid of a lot of what's wrong with this world. That's your mission field. That's its mindset. So in North America today, they believe that religion is anti-science. Have you heard that? Your kids are being taught that in public universities. Our kids are coming home and they're just under attack every day. Their beliefs are being attacked. That religion promotes hatred and bigotry. Religion promotes hatred towards women. Religion is about money, power, and control. That you can be spiritual without having to be religious. In other words, you can make the world a better place by getting rid of religion. What do you do with that mission field? How do you reach this world? So here's what we're learning. And this is what we're thinking. Now understand, we've been studying this for 25 to 30 years. And what I'm sharing with you, they know at the GC. They know this at the NAD, SDACC. The leaders of your church know the truth of what I'm sharing with you because I learned it in part from them. It's just that we haven't taught it to you before. And so, maybe one of the key reasons why we are not reaching the current culture here in North America is due to the fact that many of our methods are designed for a North America that no longer exists. Let me give you an example of this. When I was a kid, and the doorbell rang at our home, our hearts began to pound in our chest. And we became excited because you had no idea who was on the other side of the door. So when the doorbell rang, you went running to the door to open the door to see who was there because you had visitors. And you would be so excited because now you have what we called company. It's a word we don't use anymore, right? We had company. And I knew I could invite the company in at any time because the house was always cleaned because you never knew when you were going to have company. And my folks always had a cake. They always had tea. They always had treats because you never knew when you were going to have company. And so in would come the company. Adults into the kitchen, they would sit around the kitchen or living room. Us kids would go into another room and we would wait to hear, hey, the goodies are being served. And we had a great time, 2 hours of sharing and getting together and having laughter and playing with each other. And then afterwards, the company would leave and we would go, it was so great to see you. You got to come back. We got to do this again. Next time we're coming to your place. That was the 1970s. Today, when the doorbell rings, my heart races because I don't know who's on the other side of that door. I don't know if they're going to try and sell me religion, a vacuum cleaner, or a better internet plan. So in my house, you need to know if you're going to come visit me unannounced, ring the doorbell 3 times. Because the first time you ring it, it's like, everybody down. Everybody down, don't move. They can feel movement. They can smell your fear. Everybody down, don't move. Hey, okay, check your phone. Anybody text you, anybody call you. Okay, check your phone. Get down, listen, crawl. Don't let them see you through the door window. Right, okay, anybody, okay, check the phone, check the text. Okay, anybody, did you call anybody? Okay, don't move. Wait for them to leave. Okay, they're gone. You're laughing because you've been there. So when people come to visit me, or I visit people, I got to text them. And you text people and say, okay, we're coming over. And then you get in the driveway and you say, okay, we're here. Can we come in now? Don't shoot us. And then when you let them in, it's like, come on, get in before they see you. They might think we're home. 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot, but we don't want them to know we're home. Don't let them see you. Get in. If you were in the 1970s, what would your evangelistic strategy be? Door to door. How well do you think door to door works today when we're all hiding from each other? The world I grew up with, you loved that, didn't you? Yeah, he's like, that's my home. You've had to crawl more than once, right? Okay. But do you understand? The world I grew up with no longer exists. The world of Ellen White and our pioneers, that North America is gone. Right? There was a time when back then people could visit each other. But today, it's a different world. And one of the things I'm trying to communicate to Seventh-day Adventists is that what got us here as a church will not get us there in the future. We have to start answering new questions. We need to become more compassionate about real issues. We need to learn to develop methods and strategies that actually reach a world that is hostile to religion. Because here's what we're up against. This is why you should be concerned about this. Because 80% of young adult Christians from every denomination, including ours, are leaving their churches while most North Americans won't step inside a church. And you know what we do? We blame the young people and the world. It's so easy to say, well, our kids don't understand, they need to learn better, and they become secularized and worldly, and the world is so worldly, they just don't respond to the truth. And so we blame everybody else, but we never take a hard look at ourselves. Let me tell you what I do when I go fishing and the fish don't bite. When fishing, I do not question the fish. I don't blame the fish. I use dynamite. No. I question the methods of the fishermen. Do you hear me? If the fish aren't biting what I'm tossing, I don't blame them. I look at me and the gear I'm using and I ask myself, am I using the right approach for the fish I'm trying to catch? And most churches do not have the courage or the guts. Can I use that word in church? I just did, so called the conference. But we lack the courage to ask this question. Are the methods that we are using, are they designed to give us the results that we pray for? Because you know the saying, if you keep doing what you've always done, you keep getting the same results. But how do we reach a world we do not understand? I'm wanting you to understand our mission field. And I'm asking you to help us here at Nepean to reach a world that is different than your grandmother's. It's different than your pastor's. I'm asking you to learn how to reach this world because your kids are a part of it. I don't want to lose 80% of our youth. I want to bring our youth home. And the methods that got us here won't get us there. And so I'm sharing this with you because I want you to understand why I pastor the way I do. I preach the way I do. The things I recommend about how to grow a church are all born out of my desire to bring your kids home. Because as a North American, I have a little insight into how to reach a North American. And I'm asking you to trust me with that. Because those North Americans are my brother. They're your friends. Some of them are your kids. And I want us to shed the old stuff that doesn't work and start adopting the methods that do. And that takes guts. It takes guts to change. It takes guts and it takes courage to do things you're not used to because it's not the way we've always done it. Let me tell you something. You're not doing it the way our pioneers did it right now. You've evolved, you've changed. We're not even like the pioneers of the past because the times have changed and our methods need to as well. And so I know this might seem like when we share this with pastors, they're like, I don't know how to reach this world. My job is to teach you how. I can't make you want to learn. I can't even make you want to do it. But I'm hoping for the sake of our kids, you will at least hear me out. Because I'm willing to teach you how to reach this world. And I'm asking you to join me in bringing our babies and our kids home. And Canadians, can we become Canadians in order that we reach the Canadians for Jesus Christ?